Hi, welcome to the Divorce Allies podcast, a podcast and video series where we dive into all things divorce. The process of creating a settlement offer with a team of financial experts, divorce mortgage planning specialists, parenting plan coordinators, and relationship coaches. We cover all of the areas of divorce settlement process from financial to emotional well-being. My name is Melissa Gragg, and I'm a financial mediator and business valuation expert. And I'm here with Emile Flowers, who is our CDLP or Certified Divorce Lending Professional. And we're going to be talking about co-mediation and divorce. And so it's really rethinking mediation and understanding what co-mediation is for and the real life divorce complexities that it can cover. So welcome, Emile. We have a great topic today, right?
Yeah, I really think so. I've been really fascinated by this topic and our conversations around it. Being a certified mediator, meaning I took a 40-hour course, right? I then think about mediating and I'm like, I don't know about that because I'm not so confident in the fact that I would be this great mediator just out of completing the course. So there's this idea floating around that once you take a basic mediation course, you're like ready to go. Like you can guide families through life-altering decisions. And is that really enough? So let's set the record straight today. And what does it really take to be an effective mediator beyond just that 40-hour certificate?
Well, and I think that everybody struggles when they go through the 40 hours and they come out and they say, okay, I'm a mediator, and yet I don't necessarily have the tools to understand mediation. And mediation is not just in divorce. This is an alternative dispute resolution for anything that goes into the court system. So this is going to be for employment law. This is going to be for universities, that want to solve, relationships with the students. Mediation is kind of everywhere. So when you're taking this 40 hours, a part of it is for family mediation. But what we started to notice really around the country is that co-mediation is kind of like a term that has a different connotation to everyone in every area. And so we're really going to start to focus on just the divorce community and how divorce mediation works. And co-mediation is similar or is kind of a different version of collaborative divorce. So collaborative divorce, you're going to have two attorneys, you're going to have a coach in the middle, and then you have the two people. And basically they're facilitating mediation in a lot of concepts, but co-mediation is where you're going to have two mediators. And initially, most people, even in the divorce community, they kind of shy away from this concept because they're like, oh, now we're paying two people to engage in this. Like every time somebody reaches out to me, they're like, oh, can't you just be the mediator? Like, why do we need somebody else?
Right. And I it's not a one size fits all, right? So we've both seen lawyers ignoring the finances, therapists ignoring the home, nobody quite sure what to do with a business valuation or a quadro. What if we stopped expecting one person to do it all? So how do you feel about co-mediation as it solves the single lane express problem we see in traditional mediation, right? So maybe there's a head mediator with like other mediators that come in and solve certain issues, right?
Right.
And they go ahead and put together an actual MOU that makes sense.
Yeah. And an MOU is kind of at the end, a memorandum of understanding. And so that's just going to be kind of a loose version of what did we agree to and what could potentially be submitted to the court, or does it need an attorney? So let's go back to mediation, because what we have is a lot of people that could enter into mediation because they really are not wanting to go to a judge. They're not wanting to go to trial. They also want to save some money because they start to see that the longer we stay in this process, it's going to be monthly retainers after monthly retainers. Now you still could have a toxic spouse, but what I feel like is if you can get your toxic spouse to come to mediation Now you have a mediator. And we talk a lot about the mediator is not your friend, but they are also, kind of sitting in the middle, right? And they typically are lawyers or former judges, and they have an understanding of the law. But mediation is about much more than the law. Quite frankly, when you exit litigation world and you enter into mediation world, there's a whole different set of rules. And so if you have a mediator, what you would be doing as an advocate for your own process is talking to that mediator and saying, hey, we have a house. Could we get somebody to come in as a neutral, right? When you enter as a CDLP, you're
Absolutely.
a neutral third party. Could we get a specialist to come in and look at the house and determine if one person could keep it, if the other person could keep it, if they need to sell it, right? Or there's some other version of that, which there are a lot of versions of that. Somebody could be staying in the home and the other person paying the mortgage, and for a certain amount of time until the kids go off to school. So
Absolutely.
that's just one area. If you have a business, you may want a business valuation expert. Now, if they're trained as a mediator, that is essentially co-mediating, because you're bringing in another specialist to take a look at something specific. The other part is a parenting plan. And so in a parenting plan, could most mediators put something together? Sure. Do most lawyers look at this? Sure. But the problem is when the mediator or the lawyer step outside of their lane. And so what you're doing is kind of bringing some specialist in that's going to have a very narrow focus, and the main mediator is still moving the process through. So it's almost like the main mediator says, hey, we have an issue with the house. Let's bring in Emily, right? Oh,
Yep.
we have an issue with the business. Let's bring in Melissa. Oh, we have an issue with the parenting plan. Let's bring in Kristen. Sometimes you would actually work with those people separately outside of that traditional mediation, and then bring the documents, bring the knowledge, bring the reports back to that. Just like if you had an appraiser for the house, the appraiser doesn't sit in the mediation asking you, like, what's the square footage of your house? No, they're going to go to your location. They're going to measure everything. They're going to pull up and do their research. They're going to give you a report. They're going to talk. They might present it to you and your spouse. But at the end of the day, that was a piece of information that you really needed to put together the entire settlement. So it's co-mediation, but that has, as a term, has a lot of connotations. What we're looking at is almost like team mediation, where you're putting together the right team, they're at the right time, and it really makes the process flow smoother and quicker. And quite frankly, you could do it even if you're currently in mediation. You would just be advocating for yourself and saying, hey, this is a really big issue. We would like a specialist to come in. How do you feel about that? And or do you recommend somebody? Because those specialists don't have to be in your state, right? Lawyers have to work in your state. Sometimes mediators will be in your state because you want them in person. But most of this is being facilitated online through Zoom. So get the right specialist that actually understands how to facilitate this in a way that's going to be cost effective.
Yeah, I even think about, complex tax issues. Who is going to tackle that? And I've had a tax professional come in my lane and say, oh, just get a quitclaim deed. And it's like, dude, get out of my lane.
Right.
Because that's not going to solve our issue. That doesn't remove somebody from the mortgage. It only removes them from the title. And
but that's a conversation.
Distinctions.
That's a conversation that, an attorney or a mediator, like let's say I'm a financial mediator, right? Mm-hmm. And you have this tax issue, and we have that with real estate, right? Yes. So we have this complex piece of real estate, or we have a commercial property. What are the taxes going to be if we sell it? Now, you might be able to say you can afford it, you cannot afford it. I might be able to say, here's how it looks in your financial picture. But the reality is we would both pull in, and I have worked for accounting firms. I have done personal and corporate taxes.
Yes.
I would still pull in a tax expert, because what I want is, if that tax expert says, hey, if you sell this, this is going to be the tax consequences, there's a possibility that you would actually work with that tax professional in order to file those tax returns. And now they have to stand by the word that they gave or the advice that they gave you. And I would much rather, again, mediators are impartial, right? So they should recognize, you know what, I'm light in knowledge in this area. And if you are not a tax professional, or if I'm not like, again, parenting plans, you can go download them online, easy peasy. You could get a valuation by like an AI chatbot or something for relatively cheap. Can you do with that information what you need to do? Will the parenting plan hold up over time if you don't work with a specialist? Did you cover all of the bases, right? And so that's where you have, again, that main mediator, and they're keeping everybody going in the right direction. But in the meantime, like, let's take, for example, you have a complex situation. You start talking with the mediator. A lot of times the kids are the biggest issue, or the house. So you would start with those two specialists. And then in the meantime, the business valuation takes like maybe a couple weeks or a month. So now you're moving the parenting plan forward, you're moving the house situation forward. By the time I come in with the business valuation, all of the other pieces of the puzzle are already put together. The business valuation comes into that picture, and now you can probably start talking about how we're splitting assets. So if you don't move in that process, you could be wasting time. You could be spending time talking with a mediator that has literally no idea. So what is the mediator going to do? Well, Emily, do you think you can afford that house? And you're like, well, I don't know. And you're like, okay, well, when you figure it out, right, as opposed to the mediator could really be bringing in those experts and saying, hey, now's the time to talk to this person. So if the mediator that you're working with doesn't think that there are patterns or process to this, they're wrong. You know, like, as I've seen enough mediation of hundreds of cases, that's how I got better at being a mediator. It wasn't because I was trained at anything. It was actually really confusing when I was trained. I was like, what do you do now? Right?
Exactly. No, I feel the same way. When I was like, what? If I had to start this process from the beginning, I would fail. I mean, I would fail. I think it would take hours of probably shadowing somebody in several different cases and different types of mediators. So say your mediator is like a therapist. So imagine a lead mediator who's a therapist, okay, acting like a conductor, bringing in a parenting specialist and a CDLP or a GAL or a CDFA or a business, right? Like bringing in and kind of segmenting this process as they're bringing in information to create this actually executable document, because that's the problem with the housing part, is it isn't always executable because we're asking the wrong questions, right? So having subject matter specialists in this model with a lead mediator could be very effective. So some clients feel overwhelmed by what seems complex, right? They just might need clarity. So I know that you and I have been in a room where somebody thinks their financial picture is super duper complex, and we're sitting here going, well, in reality, maybe it's not as complex. So bringing in maybe a financial mediator to help de-escalate that fear and create better outcomes could be partially a solution. So why do you think so many clients think that they have complex finances, and how does a financial mediator kind of decipher that for them, give ease of mind, or state, yep, we've got some complexities here. Like, let's parcel these out. How do you
Yeah.
feel about that?
I mean, anybody who is a parent or is working with children will know that math is very difficult. And for the most part, it's just a stumbling block for most people that they have this belief that I can't really figure out the finances, or I haven't been involved in paying the bills, and there's just a lot of unknown. For the most part, at the beginning, people are just want to make the right decision, but are very unclear of how to move forward. And so for the most part, when you look at mediators, again, they're traditionally going to be from the legal setting. So they're going to be former lawyers that are kind of like, I am done with doing it through the court system because the court system is just horrific, right? Or they're going to be financial people or therapists, because in collaborative divorce, therapists are a real key, right? Social workers, therapists, things like that. But they may not have an understanding of the process. And a lot of times mediators are mediators because they don't want to fight this in the system.
Yeah,
they actually are conflict averse, but so they have a kind of a difficulty in understanding. The other thing is that complex finances are not that difficult to people who are financial experts. And so again, just like I could probably say, here's what the value of the house is, or here's what an estimate of the house is. Sure. I don't know if you can actually keep the house until I do some analysis. So why would I run that analysis and then question myself, right? As opposed to hire somebody in and say, okay, Emily's going to tell you whether you can keep the house or not. And based on those options, we will then run the mediation option so that you can see what that exists. If only one person can keep the house, then we're running two scenarios. Person A keeps the house or we sell the house. Those are the two options. If everybody can keep the house in some capacity, then we have three options. But again, maybe nobody can keep the house, right? And so it's just selling it that actually makes things a little bit easier. But if you don't have a clue that there are kind of systems around these finances, then it's going to be like, oh my gosh, I have a million different options. There are not a million different options.
Right. And they wonder why the bill goes up and you've got, a CDFA trying to figure out if you can keep the house. Don't do that. It'll cut down on the bill, right? Because you brought in a CDLP so they could just do the work that needed to be done. The other person stayed in their lane at the same time, and it all magically came together in a way that made sense, and it cut down on all the what ifs and all the hours that somebody spent calculating income when they didn't know how to calculate income for a mortgage.
Right. And I think that, again, it's trying to understand what the possibilities are. A true mediator is sitting in the middle and saying to the parties, do you want to keep it? Do you want to sell it? Can you keep it? Like, they're going to default to you. And so in a lot of situations, like even with the business valuation, they might be like, okay, well, you own a landscaping company, right? Hey, do you know what it's worth? Well, and the business owner is going to be like, well, I think it's worth this. And the spouse who's not involved in it is going to be like, well, that doesn't make sense because they always said that it was worth so much more. That mediator is just going to sit there and say, well, do you feel comfortable with that number? Let's put it in the formula. There's no basis. And again, you're thinking, well, the mediator would tell me if I needed to get another expert to come in. No, that's not actually the case. The mediator could gatekeep your case and just be like, let me help you through. Let's talk it through. We'll take a whole session and we'll talk it through because I bought a house once or I own a house, right? Having just personal experience in this space, because a lot of people got divorced and then become mediators. Just having experience in this space from what your own personal experience is not enough. Like after I did the 40 hours of training, I did advanced training because it was so unclear. And they used terms like BATNA and WATNA. And I was like, what the heck are you guys talking about?
Right.
So instead, can't you just say best case, worst case? Like,
Right. What's
why
your
do we have,
Zelda?
right?
You're like, what?
So I took advanced training, but really to connect with other mediators around. And I started to realize that everybody has their own kind of system,
Yep.
right? That they're not necessarily seeing how other people are operating. So they're just working in a vacuum. In the Divorce Allies, we realize that all of these people are very necessary. And if each of them gave their report, their analyses, and you pull it all together, the main mediator could pull all of that together. I got the business valuation report. I have the business valuator come in to one of the mediations, and she's going to tell us about the valuation so that everybody's very clear. I have a report that both of you can keep the house, but I'm going to have the CDLP come in and describe it to us so that we ask questions and make sure we know what are the rubrics. Oh, she needs to have a support payment for 5 years
Sure.
at $5,000. Okay,
Right.
we'll make sure we have that language. Like it's almost like an assembly line where you're
Yeah.
making sure that, like, okay, now it's time for the parenting plan. The parenting plan and the business valuation could take equivalent amount of time, but the parenting plan is going to be a specialist working directly with you and your spouse over several sessions. Same with the valuator. So in those situations, are you really co-mediating, or are you having the structure of the mediation happen, and then you're having these side meetings with the specialist to get information to pull it back to the main mediator? And so yes, you're paying for all of those, but you're paying for the report or the knowledge that's going to come in to then allow you to have 3 or 4 options that are actually feasible, reasonable, and executable. And those are important, right?
I 1000% agree with that. And, we in solo mediation, one party often dominates, right? So sometimes that one mediator can't really get control of all of the parts and pieces, or you have a toxic spouse, whatever it is. Co-mediation, especially maybe there's a male and female mediator. There's different professionals, like you're saying, the experts or emotional balance type mediators, right? Can
Right.
reestablish trust in the process itself, right? So let's talk about emotional safety and control, and how does co-mediation help couples feel more seen, more heard, less bulldozed, and just kind of on an even keel, maybe.
I think that that's important because the biggest issue in mediation is bias, right? So
Mhm.
I have to work on my bias because as a woman, I may connect more naturally with women, right? I might come in and be like, "Oh, Emily, you look great today. You have a cute shirt, da, da,
Right.
da." That's going to establish bias like off the jump,
Yep.
right? So you really have to measure how you communicate. So in some issues, like for a business valuation, you might have a very domineering spouse that's used to running a company and telling everybody what to do. And so a lot of times people will be like, well, I need to get a mediator that's going to put them in their place. And sometimes that's a former judge. A former judge mediator is going to have a little bit more heavy hand in what is legally or not legally allowed, right? In the finance world, there's so much gray that you're really like, well, am I over here or am I over here? Is the value of the business 100,000 or is it 50,000? Right? We're establishing these things. So if you have some of these people at the table and you have a main mediator that has a group of people that they work with, we've seen co-mediation around the country work very well when it's a contained group. So we're
Hmm.
always pulling in the same CDLP, or we're always pulling in, a handful of financial professionals. We're pulling in a business valuation person. The more everybody knows how to cohesively bring in those experts, the better it's going to be in the process. And again, the process should take as long as it takes to make sure everybody's comfortable with the information, has been able to review all of the options, and has made a decision based on potentially talking to some advocates. And so in the mediation process, we're not bringing in advocates, we're bringing in these third-party neutrals, financial neutral, a housing neutral, a parenting plan neutral, a potential coach, a narcissistic coach that is coming in as a neutral. Again, all of them have different processes, but they are coming together to move this along in a very efficient pattern. And sometimes I don't know what there could be. Like if you have some gray area, which is inheritance, separate assets, somebody's misleading or hiding assets, like it's still going to be easier to bring them together and have a financial person kind of have that discussion. Because if you want to press a business valuation or an owner, if I want to press them and say, hey, these documents, they don't look right. It looks like you're skimming off the top, or it looks like your expenses are really personally related. I can just make those adjustments in the valuation. We don't have to do a full-blown forensic analysis. We don't have to do a full-blown, look at 9 years of data.
Right.
We can say, hey, do you think some of these are personal in nature? Because, a lot of times we run those through the business. Yeah, probably. Okay, would it be okay if I removed it by 50,000? And here's the reason why. And they might be like, yeah, let's look at the numbers like that. We can make adjustments that then can be used by the mediator, but you may still have advocates that you have on the outside. You still may have an attorney that you're like, okay, you're going to fight for me and my position. You really want an attorney to fight for you in the documents, in the finalization or the settlement agreement or the divorce decree or the disclosures, whatever they're called in your state. You really want them to advocate for you so that the final product that you agree to is still covering all the bases that protects you.
I agree with that too. Melissa and I have a case that we've been working on for a while, and I think we're going to do a separate episode on that and kind of go through how co-mediation would work in there and give you an example. So I'm going to leave that for another time. But at Divorce Allies, we don't believe in a one-size-fits-all mediation. We believe in the right people in the right seat at the right time. And if you're facing divorce or supporting someone who is, check out the Divorce Allies for tools, events, or to connect with professionals like us who walk the talk. And remember, resolution doesn't have to be complicated. It just has to be collaborative. So thanks, Melissa. This was a great conversation.